Hello, my friends, and I wish you a very warm welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today for what is going to be a fantastic jump into the world of fantasy and adventure and storytelling at its absolute best. In a moment, we'll be meeting the fabulous author of the World of Podkin One-Ear series of books. Whether you're familiar with these, you've read them yourselves, or have yet to pick them up, this will surely inspire you to give these a read, but also to create your own worlds today. And we've got a lot of activities coming up for you in order to do that. The hope of today's show is to inspire your own creative writing, drawing. We got world building tips, map drawing. We have a Podkin One-Ear draw along with Kieran himself, and loads of other stuff packed in to the show today. Shall we welcome my only guest today? The man himself, the creator of the World of Podkin One-Ear series. Put your hands together. He can't hear you. He can't see you, but I think he kind of gets us in the mood. Big round of applause. Come on, make it a bit louder. Welcome the man himself, Kieran Larwood. Hello, Kieran. How are you doing?
Hello.
And lovely to have you with us, Kieran. And listen, tell us a little bit about kind of that world, where it's set, and introduction to the sort of characters of that world. So I'll hand over to you just to give us a little glimpse into that for now.
Yeah, so it's a world where there's no human beings anymore. Rabbits have taken over, and rabbits live in kind of like tribal warrens dotted around the world. There's different realms. There's 5 different realms. Each one has a very distinct feel to it. But there is evil there. So there's the creatures that lived here before who created these monster called Gormalek, who lives below the earth, and he's coated these rabbits in iron, and they become his kind of slaves, and they're trying to take over the world. And also in the Yuki books, there's other kind of evil spirits that are trying to come out and possess rabbits and do evil. So there's baddies there that have to be beaten. There's epic battles, there's wars, there's all sorts of things going on. Everything you'd expect from a kind of really juicy epic fantasy book.
Juicy is the right word. I think that's a good word for it. There's Gorm, the baddies. Now we're going to later on. We're going to look at some of the illustrations in these books. This is much later in the program, and you'll see what these characters look like if you're not familiar with it. But Gormalek's the kind of the sort of baddie of history, and from that, the Gorm have been created. So tell us a little bit about the Gorm. What kind of are they? What do they look like? And what's your sort of? Did you have an inspiration for the Gorm at all? So you know, tell us a little bit about them, because they're amazing bad guys. You know, baddies.
Yeah, but they started off actually when in the very first draft. I kind of based them on Vikings, so they were just ordinary rabbits that came from across the sea and were like raiding and invading. But then when my agent read it, she said, you know, you could make these a little bit scarier if you like. So then I was rubbing my hands. I thought, right, I'm going to go to town and make them as scary as possible. So they, so Gormalek himself, he's like a living, oozing pile of iron, and what he does is he's coats the rabbits in this iron armor, and it's all kind of jaggedy and spiky, and their eyes go red, and they become like his kind of slave army, and they're spreading out from this warren in the north and gradually taking over the rabbit world.
They're amazing bad. I mean, it's odd. You don't think of them as, you know, rabbits. They kind of like, you know what I mean? But they're incredible rabbits. Let's go for a couple of the live chat questions here. So this is from Class Riverside Primary School. How long did it take you to write The Legend of Podkin One-Ear? I guess we're talking about that first book. So thank you very much for your question, Riverside Primary School.
Yeah, thank you. Good question. So it usually takes me to do the writing of the first draft. It takes me about, I'd say, 2 months or so, maybe 3 months. But then obviously before I start, there's quite a long time spent thinking of ideas and building the world. So especially for the first book in a series, that takes itself like 2 or 3 months of just thinking. And I have lots of notebooks where I sketch things down and drawing the maps, of course, that we're going to do later on. So before you start writing, you have to have a kind of a world built. Once I've done that, the next books in the series are a little bit easier because I've already got the world. So they take about 2 or 3 months to do a first.
Well, that's what's amazing about your books, is it is a complete, believable world. I mean, sometimes, you know, with all sorts of books, or even films. I mean, you might have watched some of these kids watching, where you just sort of think that just doesn't really work. It's got to work within the world that you've created. So we're talking a little bit more about later on about how you sort of plan that world and how that kind of works. But that's a fascinating start. So thanks for your question, Riverside Primary School. Let's go for another couple of the live chat questions. So this is from here we go. this it kind of echoes what you just said. So this is Mr. Harkins from this is actually Jacob at Chandler's Bridge Academy. What made you get into books and writing them? I guess it's kind of like, were you always a reader, and then what made you go from that to writing them in the first place? Thanks very much for your question, Jacob.
Thanks, Jacob. Yeah. So yeah, I was always a reader from when I first read The Hobbit when I think I was about 6 or 7. So I read it quite early on, and then just completely fell into the world of fantasy books, and even now they're the books I read all the time. So I really wanted to kind of create my own fantasy world that kind of made readers feel the same way that I felt when I read The Hobbit, that kind of feeling of magic and anything's possible, and getting lost in this incredible fantasy world. But writing them, I didn't know I wanted to be a writer until I was in my 30s. I was actually working as a teacher. I taught reception, but my thing had always been drawing. And I was doing the picture books, reading the picture books to my children in reception. And I thought I could have a go. I could do a picture book. I could draw the pictures, but I didn't have a story to go with them. So I sat down and I started writing the story. And then I just fell in love with writing. And from that point, just wrote and wrote and wrote until I felt ready to start writing my own books.
So the impetus actually, and you'll see Kieran drawing later on, amazing illustrator as well. It didn't illustrate, oddly, well, you didn't illustrate the Podkin One-Ear books, but brilliant illustrator as well. But the illustrations was a kind of like the picture book ideas was the starting point for you getting into writing these stories then.
Yeah, I never knew I was any good at writing. I never really tried it. Yeah, as I said, I just love drawing. Used to draw all the time. I still do quite a lot now in my sketchbooks and things. And I was just thought I'd have a go at doing a picture book. So, and when I tried writing, I just discovered that that was my thing.
Isn't that weird? It's kind of in there. You don't realize it's in there, which is incredible.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, actually, this is actually an interesting one. Let's have a go at this one. Agri class, Riverside. Oh, that's Riverside. We can't have Riverside Primary School again. So it's a great question, but we can't do that. Let's go for books and writing. Oh, here we go. This is an interesting one. This is James class from St Mary's, West Derby. What is Kieran's favourite book that he has written? Because obviously, I don't know if you're familiar with Kieran's work. You've got the Carnival of the Lost series. Tree Keepers, is that the beginning of another series? Or
that's just a standalone, yeah.
Standalone. And then obviously the Podkin series, the Yuki books. And I know you've got other things on the horizon. Do you have a favourite book out of any of those? Or
I tend to be more excited about the newest ones, the latest ones, I think. Yeah. So I've got one coming out in November called Jed Greenleaf. So I'm quite excited about that. That's kind of like an alternate history set in the 18th century with magic and stuff going on. So that's very exciting.
I'll be reading that one. I mean, Kieran's stuff, honestly, you've got to read it. It's amazing stuff. Yeah. So that's coming out. So is it going to be start of a new series as well? For that?
I don't know. Possibly. Fingers crossed. Possibly.
Maybe. See how it goes. Okay, listen. Thanks for your questions here. I've got one more. I think for myself. These books, this whole series of books, has a huge connection with people all over the world. Why do you think that is? What about these sort of style of books or this genre of books, or just your particular stories in question have that kind of connection with so many people? Why do you think that is?
I think a lot of it kind of reflects like old-fashioned myths and legends. There's lots of gods and goddesses and things like that in there that lots of other cultures have that kind of mythology as well. I might be the animal thing. I know rabbits are always very popular, aren't they? They're a very popular animal. And everyone loves fantasy, but yeah, it does. It seems to be lots of followings all around the world, especially Eastern Europe and places like that seem to be really like it.
That sounds strange, isn't it? But that's what. Thanks, Sam. I suppose it's not strange. We did a mythology special a while ago actually about all those different kind of stories, and it's in us, isn't it? That those stories, storytelling, and mythologies are all stories we identify with because we're all human, and it all kind of even that's what writes about these. But even though they're rabbits, you can see their sort of humanity and struggles for the characters for that and within the rabbit world. It's really clever how you balance that up. Now what we're going to do is now, as I said, part of today's show is to inspire your own creative writing. I'm going to put some slides on in a minute that are about world building. So they're Kieran's sort of top tips for world building. Again, you can make a note of these as we go along, and then you can try some writing after the show, or you can go back and watch this on catch up and sort of go through these yourself. So I'm going to put the world building slide up, and then Kieran, we can talk through with Kieran, and when you want me to move on, Kieran, just let me know, and we move on to the next the next slide. So this is Kieran Larwood's top tips to world building. Here we go. So here we go.
Right. Okay. So this is, I mean, world building is a massive thing. You can spend as much time with it as you want, really. You can get completely lost in it. But these are my top tips for being able to build a world that's just the right size, the right amount of detail to be able to start writing some stories in it. So yeah, here we go. So draw a map. So when I started, one of my favorite authors of all time is J.R.R. Tolkien, who wrote The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. And I read that when he wrote those books, the first thing he did was he drew a map. He drew a map of Middle Earth. So when I did my my Podkin world, I thought, oh, that's what I'm going to do. I sat down, just sketched out a map in my notebook. It was very rough, the first one, but it's a really good thing to do, because before you do that, it's all just kind of floating around in your head, all these ideas, all these concepts. When you've got a map, it's like it's a real place. I don't know if it kind of tricks your brain into thinking it's real because there's a map of it, but then you start thinking, oh, this is where my characters are going to live, and you can actually start even plotting the story out. A lot of times I do workshops with children's schools. They draw a map. By the end of it, they've got like a whole series of books planned. So you can say my heroes are going to live here. Here's where my villains are going to live. They're going to have to go. You can draw out the route they're going to have to go on their quest, and you can start planning your story. But that's a really good starting point. Definitely draw a map. I'm going to tell you how to do that in a minute. Next slide, please. Yeah, so when you're creating a world, obviously you're making it up yourself from scratch, and you want it to be like a believable place. So when your reader reads it, they wouldn't think it's a real place. They can imagine they can actually go there and visit it. So the trick to doing that, I think, is not so much the big things. It's all about the little details. So things like invent the days of the week or the months of the year. What religion do people have? What kind of food do they eat? Little bits of languages or expressions they might have that are different from ours. And the more kind of detail you put into it, the more realistic it will seem when someone's reading it. They can imagine themselves there in that world you've created. Next one, please, Mr Dilly. Yes, so it can be quite daunting to kind of come up with everything yourself. So what a lot of fantasy writers do is they use history. So, for example, the tribes in Podkin's world, I took a lot of inspiration from the Bronze Age, the kind of Celtic world, where they had different tribes, different gods and goddesses, and they hadn't worked out how to use iron yet, so they had bronze and copper and things like that. So it's a really good idea to, if you know a bit about history, you can put some of that in there. A lot of fantasy writers use the medieval ages, or even further back, the Stone Age. So history is a good thing to study or look at if you want to kind of something to base it on. Next one, please, Mr. Dilly. Yeah, so experience the places you write about. So a lot of Podkin is written in the natural world. There's forests, there's marshes, there's downs, there's woodlands. So I'm really lucky where I live here on the Isle of Wight. I've got all of that around me. And I used to, when I about to write a scene somewhere, I like to go out and kind of walk around the place and just kind of soak it all in. What can I see? What can I hear? What can I smell? And I put all those details into my writing. Again, it's another way of just making your world convincing and like a real place. Yeah, so when you start building a world, it's a bit overwhelming. You think, oh my goodness, I've got to name all these places, all these people, all these things, and there's a huge amount to do. But you don't have to create the entire world. You can if you want to, but you don't have to. You just need enough to have a starting place for your characters. So the place where they live, where they're going to travel, get all those details in, and the rest of it you can just kind of sketch out. And later on, if you come to writing those bits, then you can flesh out. So, for example, with the Podkin books, yeah, I've built them up over 9 books. I've built up the whole world. But when I wrote the first one, I just had Podkin's area done properly first.
Okay, I think that's the end of those ones. I think it is, yes. So
yes,
there's some great tips there, really, really amazing. I like the bit you sort of go out and just sort of look about, but don't have to make everything up. Otherwise, it's sort of huge, isn't it?
Yeah.
You just I think you'd be there forever trying to plan it and not actually getting into it. How much of the stuff actually you have that you said about that map? How much of the world gets created once you start actually writing? So other things come to you as you kind of write and sort of get to know the characters more as you kind of write. So how much of those other things, sort of layers or sort of depths of characterization or maybe little bits get added to it as you write along?
So when I wrote Podkin, originally the series was called The 5 Realms. I wrote the first 3 Podkin books, and I realized they had only been set in one of the realms, so I had four other realms to write about. So when I wrote the Uki books, I thought, right, I'm going to go somewhere else now. So I went to another part of the world and I built that up. And then I made Podkin. He's travelled down to all the other. So eventually, by the end, he's been around all the 5 realms. But I just literally just the bit that I needed for the story was the bit that I made, and the rest of it I kind of built up over the years.
We talk about the Podkin and then the Uki books and how they all sort of join up a bit later on. But I just quickly on what you just said there. Was it hard once you've had Podkin in one part of those realms? Was it hard to sort of come up with the other realm that kind of not matched, but you know what I mean? That kind of was as interesting as that one in terms of that. How did you approach that? In terms of the landscape and the what was in it and stuff like that.
It was really fun actually. So the Uki books, the first one is set in the kind of these plains. So I looked at kind of like Native American culture and I had different creatures there, and it was really exciting actually to be able to do something different. The second Uki book is set in the marshes. So again, I went out and spent a lot of time walking around the marshes and swamps here on the island and kind of not jotting down all the creatures I saw. And I got to make up like a dialect that the tribes in the marsh use. And the last one is set in like a medieval city, so that I went back to my medieval history for that. So it was really fun actually. I got to kind of explore lots of different. I tried to make each book like a very distinct original setting. But I got to explore lots of different things.
But it actually works, but also it's the skill of making it original setting, but all part of one world that still works together. So when they cross over into these different realms, they all kind of works, which is what they do. Okay, we're gonna have a few more questions from school. A couple on the live chat, a couple that were sent in before. This is from St. Catherine's School, Chipping Camden. What was your inspiration for creating the characters as rabbits? You sort of mentioned that a bit later on, but anything else you'd like to add to that?
Well, that was really interesting because I knew I wanted to write a fantasy book, but I didn't know what was going to be in it. And I wanted it to be a very original, something new. I don't know if you read fantasy books. Lots of them, they have elves, dwarves, and dragons, and they're all quite similar. So I mentioned that I love drawing. I keep all my sketchbooks, and I was just flicking through my sketchbooks, going back over the years. And I noticed that every now and then I'd drawn rabbits with swords and spears and shields. And it made me think there was like maybe an idea kind of trapped in my head trying to get out. I thought, no one's done a fantasy story with rabbits in before. So that's when I got my inspiration from my own doodles.
Well, this actually carries on for that, and you sort of answered it as well. So Perseus class, year 4, loosely fills. What was your inspiration for the character Podkin One-Ear, and why is he a rabbit? So you sort of mentioned that bit, but that first part of the question, did you have an inspiration for it in terms of other characters you read, or some authors, and I'd be interested in what your reply is kind of like it's based on elements of themselves or elements they kind of would liken themselves or things like that. Was there any particular inspiration for that?
The way he came about actually was really interesting because I wrote the scene where at the beginning of the story, it's kind of a story within a story. So there's a bard, a storyteller. He travels to the warren. He starts talking to the young rabbits, and they're asking for different stories they want him to tell. And I didn't know what the story was going to be at the time. And I was writing down the names of stories these rabbits were calling out, and just out of the top of my head, I just wrote down Podkin One-Ear. And then I thought, oh, that's a really good name. There's a story behind that. So I started to build it up. How did he lose his ear? Was he born without it? Was it cut off? Did he lose it in a battle? And I gradually built up the story. Just the name just popped out of nowhere. And then as for kind of who he's based on, because I'm the eldest brother and I've got 2 younger brothers. So there's 3 of us, and I've got 3 children of my own. So I've kind of put lots of those into Podkin, Pook, and Paz. So there's lots of all the kind of bickering they do, but they love each other really. There's lots of that.
Bickering? With children? I don't believe that. That's amazing. That name just popped in your head, though. That's incredible, isn't it? I mean, it's like that.
Yeah, no idea. Just literally just came out of my head onto the page.
It's meant to be, Kieran. You see, you were meant to have that name. You were meant to write this book. That's a good thing. Okay, so what we're going to do now, we've got loads of questions, but we're going to go over to Kieran for a. That's right. We've got to get rid of this particular one because we're not answering that anymore. We're going to go over to Kieran for a reading from Podkin. I hand over to you, Kieran. Give us a bit of context and from what book it's from. What book are we reading this particular excerpt from?
I'm going to start off where it begins with the Legend of Podkin One-Ear.
Great.
And I'm going to read it right from the beginning, in case you haven't read the book yet. And it sort of describes who Podkin is and what he's like, and what's going to happen to him.
Great. I'll hand over to you for that. Cheers, Kieran. Here we go.
Okay. It was in those days that Podkin One-Ear lived. He wasn't a hero back then. He hadn't slain any giant rabbits or formed any robber bands. and he hadn't even begun to think about rescuing maidens. In fact, he was only a youngling, 8 summers old. Oh, and he still had both his ears. Podkin was the son of Lopkin, chieftain of the Munbury Warren, which meant that someday he himself would be chieftain, just like his father's father had been, and his father, all the way back to when the goddess made the first 12 tribes. For now, that all seemed like a long way off, and that was the way he liked it. He had an older sister called Paz, who liked to boss him around as much as possible, and a young kitten of a brother called Pook, who didn't do much except chew things and ask for soup. You might think that as a young rabbit, Podkin was already showing signs of heroism, great skill with a sword maybe, bravery, courage, wisdom, determination. You would be wrong. If anything, he was perhaps the laziest, most spoilt son of a chieftain in the whole 5 realms. At least he was up until the start of this story. His father tried his best to prepare him for leadership with lessons in history, rabbit law and soldiering, but Podkin took great delight in avoiding them all. Daydreaming and snoozing were the only things he practiced, and to be fair, he was very good at them. So it came to pass on a Bramblemas Eve, much like this one, Podkin One-Ear, although technically 2 ears at this point, was sitting upstairs in the wooden gallery that ran around the edge of Munbury Longborough. He was lazily pushing around a toy wagon, munching on a stolen piece of cornbread, and dreaming about the midwinter rabbit who would be visiting that night, hopefully with a sack full of presents. "What are you doing up here, Pod?" His sister had tiptoed up the stairs and was now glaring at him. Podkin's little brother Pook was nestled in the crook of her arm, chewing away at a carrot. "Mother sent me to get you. They're about to have turnip soup and dance the bramble reel." Podkin yawned deliberately. "Oh, the bramble reel. How exciting." He took Pook from her and tickled his tummy. He could hear all the festivities in the hall below and had absolutely no desire to join in with them. "Oh, please stand aside so I can rush down the stairs and prance about like a prize pudding." "If you don't come down, you're going to be in trouble," said Paz. "Do you have any idea what it takes to be chieftain? Nobody will want to follow a lord who spends all his time tickling his baby brother, playing with toys and hiding away in corners daydreaming." Podkin was about to leap on Paz and pull her ears when the Warren horn began to sound. The 3 young rabbits rushed to the edge of the gallery and looked down onto the hall. Soldiers were grabbing spears and shields, children were being herded into corners, and their father, Chief Lopkin, was striding towards the burrow entrance, drawing his sword, his great silver broadsword that everyone thought was magical. "The winter rabbit, the winter rabbit," Pook shouted, trying to wriggle free. "It's not the midwinter rabbit, Pook," said Podkin, the argument with Paz forgotten. "It looks like trouble, and trouble doesn't leave presents outside your burrow at night." Frightened murmurs were drifting up from the crowd below. "A rider, a lone rider coming," and then "a rider wearing armour, iron armour," and finally, "It's the Gorm are here."
Oh, and that sets it up. That does set it up, and that's the first time you see Gorm and their leader. Say it right, Scrammershank.
Scrammershank, yes, yeah.
Scrammershank, who's a fearsome dude. He's quite funny, brilliant though, amazing character. Okay, so we're going to couple more school questions, and then we're going to go into Kieran's going to speak you through. You mentioned in the world building tips about sort of starting your ideas with a map, so he's going to speak you through the sort of his way of approaching map drawing and building those worlds in just a minute. Let's have another couple of questions. So we've got a couple here already sent in, and then we go to the live chat for a couple as well. This is a good one. Edgar Suter, Primary Halesworth. Which actor would you like to be the voice of Podkin if you had a choice? Or that might have already been in the works, I'm not sure.
Well, it was actually almost happened. I did sell the rights, and a company started to put it together. And the voice of Podkin was going to be, I can't remember the actor's name, but he played Sam in Game of Thrones, which none of you would have watched because it's too grown up. But
you had all that down, and that was going to. Literally, I mean, if you were going to make a TV series or a series of films, these are the books to use. So it must be there, on someone's radar to develop. So
it got very close. They were pitching it all to Netflix and everything like that. But then the pandemic happened, and lots of TV companies stopped making programs, and so it didn't happen. But hopefully one day
something better will come along. That's what happens. But that's a great question. Okay, here's another question from that's already sent in, and then we go a couple from the live chat. So, Jonas Ridge Academy, Middlesbrough. Who is your favourite character? I guess from these books. I mean, there's quite a few to choose from. So
That's very tricky. It's a bit like having to pick your your favorite child. It's impossible. Obviously, Podkin, Pook, and Paz, because there's, like I said, there was lots of me and my brothers and my children in there. I love Crom, the blind warrior, and I think Jory, is my overall favourite, who you meet in the Yuki books. She's really cool.
It's really good. They're also very, very different, all these characters, but they're also, you know, wonderful. And I like all characters. They've got their failings as well, and I think that's what makes them human, even though the rabbits that we spoke of before. Okay, let's go to the live chat and have a little jump into there. But this is, you probably get asked this a lot, but it's quite a good one. Highcliffe Primary School, 4KM. What made you want to be an author? You sort of touched on this earlier on a little bit, but you know, it's quite a daunting thing to suddenly go from sort of doodling to picture book stuff to sort of starting to write and then sort of saying, I'm going to be an author. And there must have been a moment whereby, as you said, you were a teacher, that you stopped doing that and said, I can actually now do this full time. Well, that must have been quite a moment as well, sort of exciting, but also slightly scary, I'd imagine, at the same time. So can you sort of delve into those two parts of that question, really?
Yeah, I mean, well, what made me want to be was just basically having read those books when I was a child and feeling that sense of magic and inspiration, just wanting to do that myself. I wasn't sure I was good enough until when I had my first idea for my first book, I just sent a few chapters off to an agent, and I was kind of expecting to be rejected, and I thought that would be it. But they actually wrote back, "This is really good. Can we read the rest of the book?" So then I thought, maybe I am okay at this. I've got something there. So then I started working on it. Yeah, and then when I finally sold enough books to be able to write full time, that was brilliant, really, because I mean, teaching is a very, very hard job. Your teachers work so hard, and not only at school, they go home and they work late into the night as well. And I was doing all that and then writing on top, and it was too much, really. So, but now I get to just kind of write 2 or 3 books a year, and it's brilliant.
What particular book was there? A particular book when you realised, actually, I don't have to do the teaching anymore, I can do this full time? Was there a particular moment on a particular book?
I think the first 3 had been written, and then I got quite a good deal in America. If you get American deals, you can get quite a lot more money than you get over here.
To make a living. Well, you can make a living.
Yeah. Most writers in this country actually have to have a day job or a part-time job as well, because you don't make a lot of money, unfortunately, being an author. So
there was that moment there. So after that third book, that's amazing. Okay, let's have a quick question, a quick answer. Do you ever get writer's block? That's a good one.
Ooh, not really block. I mean, when you're writing a series like the Podkin books, that's quite good, actually, because then you've got a series of books and you've got a story to follow, so you don't have the problem of kind of having to come up with ideas. It's quite tricky sometimes when you're trying to write something new. I wouldn't say block, but lots of times I have ideas and I might start writing it and just think, this isn't really working, and it's hard to get an idea that you just can run with sometimes. But
imagine sometimes it must be the opposite, isn't it? It's that you've got too many ideas, and how do you sort of get rid of them and continue? That must be difficult, isn't it?
I usually it's quite easy to come up with the original idea, but sometimes it doesn't really work. So I usually spend a lot of time thinking about it, plan it, and then if it's still going, I'm still excited about it, I'll start writing. And then I've learned that if it gets to the point where I'm really not enjoying the writing, if it feels like a chore, then I realise the book isn't working. So then I'll stop and bin it and start something else.
Have a cup of coffee and a biscuit. Okay, so listen, we're going to go now to your map making workshop. So this is something Kieran does quite a lot, and it usually takes, I think when you usually do it, it takes about sort of 20 minutes or so. So we're not going to take that today. So we're going to have the slides up. Kieran's going to talk you through the slides and what to do. And then you can come back on the same page on the Mr Dilly website anytime up to the 19th of July, which is the end of term for most people. And you can watch this again at your leisure and pause it as you go along, so you can make these fantastic maps and worlds in your own time, in your own classroom. So Kieran, let me hand over to, we get the slides up for that. So this is Kieran's map making workshop. Just to quickly say, we did say that if you wanted a glass of rice to get the shape, that's great if you've got those to do. If you haven't, it doesn't really matter. But I'll hand over to Kieran now for his talk through. And Kieran, just let me know when you want me to move on to the next slide. Here we go.
So this is just a little tip. Sometimes when I do this in schools, some children find it tricky to draw kind of a really good outline of the coast for their maps. So this is a tip you can use if you think you might find that tricky, and that is you just get a cup of dry rice, not cooked rice, because that will just splat on your page. You pour a little bit onto your page, and then with your finger just kind of nudge it like I have there into the shape of an island or a landmass. And then next slide please, Mr Dilly. Then you get your pencil and you draw very carefully around all those grains of rice, really carefully all the way around, even like the individual ones on the side, draw around those. And then when you finish that, if you just tip the rice away very carefully, you're left with an amazing outline. But if you don't have rice, or if you think you're confident enough to do it yourself, you can just draw this kind of outline on a page. It doesn't matter if you have your page portrait or landscape. You just get your pencil and then you just do that outline. You've all seen maps and you've seen how they go. The coastline goes in and out. So let your pencil kind of go for a walk in and out, form all the outline of the map. So that's going to be your world. And then this is a pro tip. You can make it 3D if you like. And the way you do that is if you go to the bottom left-hand corner, and every time there's a little bump on your map, you draw a little line down, and you do that all the way around on the bottom left-hand corner, and then you kind of join them up underneath. You follow the line of the coastline underneath, and you can make it 3D. That's like a pro tip. You don't have to do that. So then the next bit is you have to add the features to your world, the kind of the geographical features. So quite often things like mountain ranges. So mountains often go in a line with like a range. You can see I've done some on there. Forests. I've left a space in the middle of my forest there because I'm going to write the name of the forest on it. Deserts, marshes, hills. You can anything you like: volcanoes, deserts, caves, canyons, whatever you want to have on your world. Draw them all on. I think the next slide I've got some. Yeah. So here I've got on the left hand side there's like the very basic ones. If you're not very confident at art, the good thing about doing maps is you don't have to be an amazing artist. You can just do it really basically, really simply, and you still can use it to come up with a really good story. So the basic ones are on the left, and then the kind of more advanced versions, if you've got a bit more time or you want to make it a bit more detailed, are on the right. Yeah, so all the ones I said on there, some mountains, hills, swamps and marshes. For the towns and cities, I usually just do like a dot if it's a village, or a dot with a circle around it for a town, and like a star or a square for a city. And then what you do is you also add a key onto your map. So if you put symbols like that on, you can put a key on the side to say what all the symbols mean. So you draw them all on. And then the tricky bit is naming everything. So my tip is think about who or what is going to be living in your fantasy world. So for example, with Podkin, I knew it was going to be rabbits. So when I was naming the countries, I just went on Google and I looked up all the different breeds of rabbit. There's loads. I was surprised at how many there are. And I just picked out some ones that I thought sounded really cool, that sounded like countries. And I used those for Gotland and Enderby. They're all actually breeds of rabbit. But here I've thought about, I'm going to have dragons living in the top part of my world. So another top tip for thinking of good fantasy names is if you know the Latin name for the creature, you can use that to kind of come up with a fantasy sounding name. So the Latin name for dragon is Draco. So I've called my country at the top there Dracovia, and I've written it on with nice big capital letters. And then the country at the bottom there, I'm going to have pigs living there. And Latin for pig is pork with a C. So that's Porcutia. And then because I've got a volcano on the island down the bottom there, I've called that Ignica, because Ignis is Latin for fire. So I've come up with some really good fantasy sounding names. Already I'm starting to have a bit of a story appear in my head, like maybe like the dragons are going to be the baddies and the pigs are going to be the heroes, and perhaps the pigs are going to have to go up there into Dracovia. I'm kind of building a little bit of story in my head. But then I need to name all the features that I drew on, and that's really tricky to come up with a good name. So my tip for that is to use adjectives. So, for example, the mountains there, I thought some adjectives for mountains. I thought they could be spiky, or they could be rocky. So I've got two adjectives, and I'm going to put those together to make the Spike Rock Mountains. And my forest there, I wanted like a dark, foreboding forest. So I thought gloomy is a really good adjective for that, and leafy as well. So I'm going to put those together, and I've got the gloom leaf forest, and the desert, fiery, I was thinking, and sandy. I've got the fire sand desert. So think of two good adjectives, put them together, to come up with your names. And for C's are tricky. I've used colours for C's are really good. So I've got the cyan C up there. You could have the turquoise C or the viridian C or any other kind of blue or green colour you can think of. And then you need to put where your characters live. So I've added the dots on there for the little towns and cities. My tip for naming those is, again, think of who's going to live there, what kind of creatures are going to live there. And then think about the endings. If you think of all the places around you, lots of them have very similar endings. So, for example, lots of them end in things like Ham or Hampton or Wick or Bridge or Mouth if it's near a river, or Port if it's on the coast. So for where my dragons live, I thought, what do dragons do? They breathe fire. So I've got Fire Wick. And what else do dragons have? Dragons have scales. So I've got Scale Port. And for my pigs, they oink. So I've got Oinkham there. And they eat swill. Pigs eat swill. So I've got Swillmouth there by the river. So go through, put some places where your characters live, give them all names. And then the final part is you can add lots of little details to your map. So I've put like a compass rose on there. I've put some dotted lines to show the roads that link all my towns up together. I've put some sea monsters in the sea. I think I've got, here's some extra things you can add on just to give it that final finishing touch. And then, well, you might want to do it just as a kind of an art project, or you might want to sit down and then start building up a story about that map you've created, that world.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Kieran, for that. And I think we all want to live in Oinkham, which sounds a great place. So there's some great tips. So as I said, you can go back at your own leisure on this same web page, and you can watch that through and pause as we go through it on. So you can all take time in your classroom to create your own amazing worlds, and then from that inspire, like Kieran said at the beginning, to inspire your writing and stories at the same time. So great top tip to start with. Kieran, we've got a draw along later on of Podkin himself. Have you got another reading for us from Podkin? And what is this from the same book or from a different book in the series?
I think I'm going to go with Uki for this one. So this is from Uki and the Swamp Spirit.
Okay, I'll hand over to you for that. Give us a bit of context and a little reading from Uki as we continue in the World of Podkin One-Ear series. Over to you, Kieran, for that.
So this is the second book of the Uki series, and this is the one when he goes into the swamps, into the fens. So it's all marshy and swampy and gloopy everywhere. He joins up with a tribe called the Girdles, and they're kind of they've got a long time feud or a war with this other tribe called the Maggots. And at this point, Uki and his friends, they're trying to sneak up onto the Maggot camp to kind of scout it out before they mount a big attack. So they're sneaking through the marshes, trying not to be seen as they approach this Maggot camp. Whose stupid idea was this? Jory said, drawing level with him, Jory's Uki's friend. I think it might have been mine, sorry. Let's just get it over with and get back to the village, said Jory. The quicker we're out of these fens, the better. A worrying thought occurred to Uki. If it was this tricky to get to the mound, how were the Girdles planning to mount their great attack? He caught up with Rawny and asked her. We'll come at night, she said. We know the pass well enough. By sunup, we'll all be at the bottom of the mound. If that's where them Maggots is hiding, then we just have to run up it and give him a good paddle whacking. Uki was about to suggest it might not be as easy as all that when something slithered through the mud in front of him. Something big and wriggly. He let out a yelp. Just a hoppet, said Rawny, poking the mud with her spear butt. A slimy, long-legged creature burst upwards with a plop and then began to squirm its way to the nearest pool. Only a small one, too. It was the size of my head, Uki started to say, when he spotted another movement at the pool's edge. It had looked like a pair of eyes ducking down under the water, there for an instant, then gone, any ripples it might have made disguised by those of the escaping frog. Did you see that? He asked, but everyone's attention was fixed on the muddy water in front of them. Just keep moving, said Rawny. We'll soon be out of this glop. Uki carried on, step by slurping step. He kept a careful watch on the water, though, and a few minutes later saw the eyes again. This time it looked as if they had ears behind them, long ones, rabbit ones. There's something, he began to say, when a paw shot out of the mud beside him and grabbed his leg. Glopstickers, Hitch yelled. Then there were suddenly explosions of water and muck all around as rabbits burst up from below the surface. Maggots troops, Rawny shouted. They come from beneath the mud. Bunch together. Uki had a glimpse of several mud-coated figures dressed in stitched snakeskin with some kind of masks and breathing tubes over their mouths. They had appeared from all directions, surrounding them completely. Jory had her sword drawn. The others were brandishing their spears. "Jory," he called, trying to move close to her, but his leg was still gripped tight, right around his ankle. He strained, trying to use his strength to break free, but all the mud and water made it hard to get any traction. Just as he felt his attacker's grip begin to slide, another pair of paws grabbed his foot, then more around his waist. Just how many of these glopstickers were there? Uki flailed, feeling his legs slipping out from under him. He went down on his side, cold, clammy mud flooding into his clothes, soaking through his fur. He tried to stand up again, but the paws were pulling him backwards, downwards into the swamp. "Jory!" Well, Jory was screaming, "Uki!" He had one last glimpse of her struggling towards him through the marsh, her paw outstretched, and then he was dragged down, gone under the surface. Slime, water, silt, it bubbled over his head, flooding his ears and nostrils. He could taste gritty, dank earth, feel slippery wetness squidging everywhere he tried to grip or stand, and always the paws of the Magic warriors pulling him deeper, deeper into the muddy darkness.
There we go. Another taste of the World of Podkin One-Ear with Uki, another fantastic hero in Kieran's wonderful books. We've got a few more questions from schools for you, so we're going to go to one that was sent in before, and then a couple from the excuse me, from the live chat, if that's okay, Kieran. So over here, this is from Kingsmead Primary School, Northwich. We're reading Podkin as a whole class. Do you have any other stories of animals that you are considering writing? You mentioned one earlier on, but anything else that you want to develop about that?
Animals. I've got one. I've got one coming out next year, which is about birds. So yeah, that's another. That was interesting as well. But birds, they're set in this world in the present day, but they have their own kind of society, which is kind of based on kind of fantasy as well.
Is that age at the same sort of aimed at the same age range or younger?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely kind of middle grade. Yeah, same as Podkin.
You can do a lot with birds, can't you? I mean, thought of that. Obviously, you know, the different varieties of birds is amazing, isn't it? I mean, that's quite an amazing look at it. I'm interested to see who the bad guys are. That'd be quite good. Sometimes make them the tiniest things, you know. Little sparrows. Did I say that? Because we've got loads of sparrows in our garden at the moment, so it's good. Great question for that. Okay, here we go for a couple of other questions. So we have. This is from Aquila class. Actually, no, this one actually is better from then. So, who is your favourite book character of all time? Which is incredible. Year 4 Aquila class, Lucy Fields Primary. That's quite a tricky one.
Of all time. God, that's tricky. I love, obviously, The Hobbit is one of my favourite books. So Bilbo Baggins is a great character, especially that he's a very ordinary guy, isn't he, at the start of the story, and he gets sucked into this incredible adventure, and he has to cope with dragons and dwarves and orcs and things. So he's one of my favourites, I think. And there's a series of books by Ursula Le Guin called The Wizard of Earthsea, and there's a wizard in there called Sparrowhawk, who's I always loved him when I wanted to have like magic powers like him.
So all those. I remember speaking to you. I spoke to Kieran ages ago about something, but I don't know if any of you children watching are familiar with. They're still published the the fighting fantasy books, which are sort of role play books, and they came out years ago. But they've had a real big sort of resurgence, really, haven't they? And lots of new ones are being written now. They were quite an influence on you as well as a kid, weren't they? Those books, the fighting fantasy books.
Oh yeah, I used to play those. Yeah, all the time with my dice and my pencil. And I just started playing with my son actually. They're great. Yeah.
Which one are you doing with him? You started at the Warlock of Firetop Mountain, is it, or the others? You started somewhere?
Forest of Doom. We're doing at the moment.
Forest of Doom. So if you haven't to check out the fighting fantasy books, because they've got new ones coming out. There was just one other one here from the live chat. This is a really interesting question, really. But Sparrows, Kingsmead Primary. What are you most proud of in your books? Which is quite an interesting question. Anything?
I think I'm just proud that I managed to get published, and that that people like them and seem to be enjoying them. You know, especially every World Book Day when I see all the kind of Podkin and Paz costumes and things. That's just magical.
That must be amazing. That must be wonderful.
It's incredible.
Okay, we've got another question for you, which kind of leads into. In a minute, we're going to talk about the illustrations in there, and if you've read the books, you'll see the illustrations in there. And Kieran will talk a little bit about the illustrator David Wyatt. Is that right?
Yes.
In a moment, and we'll look at some of the pictures and stuff. But just a quick question to sort of lead us into that from Lingwell Primary in Lincoln. Did you have an idea of what illustrations you wanted before you started writing? Is it kind of what's that process like with David in terms of that?
So right at the very, very beginning, I mean, when I'm writing my story, I tend to, before I start writing the characters, I tend to sketch them out myself, just to kind of get them in my head and visualize them. And then when I wrote Podkin, I put a couple of my own illustrations in. I was kind of hoping that they might let me illustrate it, but I wasn't good enough. Yeah, but you don't, as a writer, you don't get to choose who is your illustrator. The publishers, they have lots of illustrators they know of, and they put you together with someone they think will be really good, and you might get like a selection of 3 or 4, and you can say, oh, I really like that one. But yeah, they showed me David's, and I was just like, wow, that's incredible.
It's incredible. Well, it's actually your books. I mean, a lot of books have obviously got illustrations with them, and novels with pictures and stuff, and they're great. But then there are certain books where for me anyway, the illustrations kind of like are completely linked to the words. The example I'm trying to talk about here, if any of your children have ever looked through an Alice in Wonderland book, and you see the illustrations for Alice in Wonderland and the text, and you can't imagine one without the other. And so when you read your books, those illustrations completely bring to life your words in the most incredible way. Let's have a quick look at some of them, so people get an idea. We've got quite a few, and I'll flick through these. And Kieran, you can sort of mention, if you like, without giving too much away, what these illustrations, parts of the story they illustrate. So this is to give you an idea. This is from the second of the Podkin series, I believe, isn't it? The Gift of Dark Hollow. What's going on here in this picture, and what are we looking at here?
So this is right at the very beginning. This was a nightmare that the bard was having at the start of the story, and he was kind of remembering the Gorm crows. So the Gorm, as well as taking over rabbits, they took over other animals as well, and they took over crows and covered them with these kind of iron feathers, and they had like these blazing red eyes. So he's having a nightmare about them right at the very start of the story.
So that's on there. This is also Gift of Dark Hollow, and this kind of shows Podkin and Paz and Pook there. So this is what's going on in this particular bit.
So this is they have to take refuge in a kind of an abandoned warren called Dark Hollow, and they're exploring it. They find like a tunnel, a hole beneath the floor, and they go down into this completely old warren beneath the one they're living in, and they find this chamber. It's been abandoned for centuries, and it's got all the David's amazing at drawing kind of roots and branches and things. So it's got all the roots and things hanging down, and mushrooms and everything. And Podkin's about to go into this kind of hidden room and find something very important.
And this one, we see Scrammershank. So here we go. There he is. Okay.
Yeah, so that's the big baddie, and his Gorm warriors all around him. And Podkin, they trap Podkin. It looks like it's all over for him. But all these brambles that David has brilliantly drawn in the background, they're going to come in very important quite soon.
It's amazing. You can see where you get, as you said, that sort of Viking sort of influence in terms of obviously your idea, but obviously how David's used that to sort of bring these characters to life. So this is The Beast of Grimheart, which is the third Podkin book. And here we've got, now you can see the rabbits here. So tell us, you mentioned them already. So tell us the blind character in the middle, and then we've got these wolves as well. Tell us a little bit about them.
So yeah, that's Crom. Podkin's is on Crom's back. Crom is blind, but he's got a magic bow which he's able to fire with Podkin's help, which is why Podkin's on his back. Podkin is acting as his eyes. And then you've got these at the back. You've got these giant rabbits with the horns, and they're wolves with these kind of saber-toothed fangs. They are like ancient rabbits and wolves from deep in the heart of this massive forest that they've always been kind of lost in legend, but Podkin discovers them and manages to get them to fight on his side. And this scene is like the big epic battle at the final part of the book.
I love that illustration. I mean, the movement and the feel of that is absolutely amazing. Let's just jump to a couple of the Yuki books now. So Yuki and the Outcast. So this is Yuki himself. Can you sort of tell us a little bit what's going on here? This is sort of at the start of the book, isn't it?
Yeah, so Uki, this is where Uki's his kind of adventure begins. He ends up, his mother thought he had died, so she kind of was burying him in this graveyard, and then the fiery thing in front of him there is actually a spirit, like left over from the time of the ancients, and the spirit bonds with Uki and gives him some powers and sets him off on his quest. And there's 4 other spirits that have escaped that Uki has to go and capture before they can wreak havoc on the rabbit world.
Fantastic. Let's have one. That's 12. There's so much we could look at here. So let's go. Actually, let's go from the your latest. So your latest is back to Podkin in the Singing Spear, and here's the cover, and here's an illustration from that. So give us a little bit of context to where we are here, because this is book number 7, basically, isn't it?
Yes,
series. Yeah.
So Podkin, he's back on his quest to find. There's 12 gifts of the goddess that Podkin has to find and kind of bring together. So he's got one there, which is the Singing Spear, which is the title of the book, and he's up in the mountains with his tribe of dwarf rabbits, and they have like a death slide, which is their way of getting from the top of the mountain to the bottom. And Podkin is going down it and looking very terrified. And that was the picture that the covers are actually done by a different artist called Fernando Juarez. And what he does is he takes one of David's illustrations and then draws it in his own style. So it's nice with the two together. You can see how Fernando has kind of adapted David's picture there into his own cover.
It's fascinating that. Now we're going to Kieran's spoken about David Wyatt, and then Fernando, who's done the cover. But Kieran himself is a brilliant artist. So we're going to do our draw along now. This particular part is pre-recorded for technical reasons. So this is, get your pen and paper ready, and we're going to have the draw along. It's about 5 minutes, maybe a little bit longer for that. After that, we've got a couple more questions from you, and then we're going to say goodbye. So I know some of you might have to go off. Again, you can watch us on the same link. If you can stay with us, We'll probably be in about another 10 to about 12 minutes or so left of the show today. So we're going to say goodbye to Kieran for now, and then we're going to bring in Kieran again with our draw along. So pen and paper ready for the Podkin One-Ear draw along with Mr Larwood himself. Here we go.
Right, I'm going to have a little go at drawing Podkin. I'm no David Wyatt, so my Podkin probably looks very different to the ones that he draws. But this is how I do it anyway. I've also cheated a little bit. I've done a rough pencil sketch just so I can make sure I've got it the right size when I draw. But I'm going to draw in pen. So when I do Podkin, I always do him from the side on with a rabbit's nose. So rabbit's nose is just like a V shape. Big chunky cheeks. And you can just see one of his eyes from the side, because rabbits have their eyes on the sides of their heads, not the front, because they've evolved to keep an eye out for predators. So when you're doing a rabbit eye, a nice white circle of light shining on, and a smaller one there. There's the pupil. And Podkin's got brown eyes, so I'm just going to do some shading around there to make them look darker. There we go. When David draws him, he has a little kind of quiff of tufty hair at the front there, and of course he's only got one ear, and he has a bandana tied across where his missing ear would be. So I'm going to put that in there. And then I'm going to put a little knot there, and these are the ends of the bandana poking out. I like drawing these bits. And the rest of his face in there with a little tufty bit of hair. Of course his ear, he's only got one. And that's on the right hand side, so I'll put that one in there, nice and big. There we go. And a bit of shading to show that that's behind his head. When you're shading fur, you can just do little lines like this to make it look like fur, and then they get further apart as the shading gets lighter. Let's do his cloak now. Of course he's got the brooch, moonfire brooch, which holds his cloak together and also lets him jump between the shadows when the moon's out. And we'll do the folds of his cloak as it comes over like this. And I always imagine him, I know he's supposed to be a chieftain's son, but he kind of travels around. So I imagine his clothes is always a little bit tatty and ragged and travel worn. You can do like jagged edges, and we'll add some patches and things on in a bit. And then the back of his cloak here, I'm going to do a little hood coming down his back. It's a hooded cloak. You can put that when it rains. And then this bit going over his arm there. Right, now we need to do his paws holding Starclaw. I've done Starclaw in its sheath, because I imagine you'd have to be very careful with that. You can cut through anything. If you weren't careful, you end up cutting through your fingers. There's his thumb. And the hilt of Starclaw, the pommel's got a kind of little face on the end of it, like that. That's how I imagine it anyway. That's the top of the sword there, kind of like a Bronze Age Celtic looking sword. And this is the sheath that it's in, which is tied on with some leather to his belt. Then the sheath comes down like this by his leg, and you just be able to see the rest of his arm like that going under his cloak. I'm going to shade that in because that will be hidden in the shadows. There we go. And his other arm here, he's got his thumb kind of in his belt. I always draw them with 3 fingers, although I think they're probably supposed to have 4 actually. And then the rest of his arm there, and then his belt coming along here. His belt buckle. Just do the top half like that, a little pin in it there. And then the belt comes through like this. That's the end of the belt. You can put some holes in it. There's his belt around his waist. And I always imagine him wearing kind of like a long jerkin that pokes down below his belt. Like that. I'm going to put some patches on here. Just draw a square and some little lines. On there. Then his feet. Three toes again. And the same on the other side. These are just some cloth wraps around the bottom of his legs. There's 3 big rabbit toes. And then just to finish it off, what I'm going to do is a raggedy cloak coming down with lots of holes in it at the back there. And then just to show he's standing on the ground, and there we go, Podkin.
As you see, amazing, and incredible illustrator himself. So that says, welcome back, Kieran, for our last few questions before we say goodbye. So Kieran, that's amazing drawing. They didn't want you to do the illustrations. I can't quite understand that. That's incredible. I mean, that's as good as most other people's illustrations in their book. So again, if you want to watch that again and pause that, you can go back on this same link on the Mr Dilly website to do so. So Kieran, before we say goodbye, let's have a couple more questions. So this was from Riverside Primary School, Year 4 Aggro. What gave you the idea of Podkin losing his ear in that sense? Because that was a title.
Yeah, so as I said, the name Podkin One-Ear just popped out of my head, and then I had to think about how he would lose his ear. And then I don't want to give too many spoilers away, but yeah, I thought it'd be interesting to have someone he knows had to cut it off, and so the whole story of having to use Star Claw came out of that, because obviously I didn't want him to be. I wanted it to be. It's a children's book. I didn't want it to be too horrible, so it had to be something that could just go and take his ear off really simply and easily. So yeah, it all came from that one name. And
it's funny because, as you said, you like for children for World Book Day and stuff, that's immediately identifiable, isn't it? Just get a rabbit thing, chop an ear off, or pin it back, or whatever you want to do.
Tie a red bandana around, you're done.
And you're done, which is brilliant. Okay, let's have let's go for you. We kind of already said this, but I'll be interested to know if there's any more after this. So, Skipsea Primary School, East Riding, Yorkshire. How many more Podkin adventures will there be? So, Podkin and the Singing Spears, the latest, which came out last year. Did it come out last year?
Last year. How about last year? Yeah.
So when's the next one for this coming out? That's coming out later this year, or
September is Podkin, or is it October? September, October is Podkin and the Tentacled Terror, which is number 8. I've just finished the writing number 9, which is the end of kind of Podkin's story. But there is going to be a graphic novel set in the world of Podkin, which I'm going to start writing soon. And then all the Podkin stories over, there's still like a whole world I'd like to explore. So hopefully maybe some more stories about other characters or somewhere else in the world.
Could they still fit within those 5 realms? I mean, it may be in a different time period or something like that.
Yeah, I could, or there might be in other realms that haven't been discovered yet. There's all sorts of things I could do. So it's quite exciting.
It's quite exciting. Listen, Kieran, we could speak to you all day, and we got tons of questions and all this. We'd be here for hours, which of course we can't do. The World of Podkin One-Ear series is an incredible read, and if you're already a reader, or you're a reluctant reader, or you never really got into stories before, I would really recommend these. They're a great sort of introduction, and you can't get swept into this amazing world of adventures, and they're really relatable, beautiful characters, good baddies, as we said, very good baddies, which is really, really good. I think we all have already enjoyed today's show. So in your classrooms, just before I do this, because we already had this, St. Mary's in Derby, their question came up earlier, and they posted on X or Twitter, whatever it's called now. They gave a big round of applause for their question coming up on screen. If you want to actually post any pictures of your class watching today, Instagram and X is at Mr Dilly Presents, and copy myself in and Kieran. So Kieran is here at KM Larwood as well, and mine, as you can see, is at Mr Dilly Presents. And we'd love to see some pictures on either of those of just your class enjoying it, or even your map drawing when you get to do it, or your Podkin One-Ear drawings. Just hold them up, and I'm sure we'll share them and like that for now. But for now, Mr. Larwood, thank you so much for joining us today. All the best of luck with your wonderful books. Let's give Kieran Larwood a big round of applause. And thank you very much, Kieran. And give everyone a big goodbye for everybody.
Thank you. And thanks for watching. I hope you enjoy the books. Have a good summer holiday.
Cheers, Kieran. Nice to speak to you. Thanks for your time. Thank you very much. Goodbye. Bye-bye. So thanks so much for watching. It's goodbye from me, my friends. And it's goodbye from me. Thank you very much. Goodbye.